James is intense. Like I feel myself like on the edge.
That is awesome. That's so great. I'm glad you feel on the edge. I feel on the edge when I'm in James's voice because James, who I thought was just this one kind of guy, is exactly the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like going back to that perspective and it just opens up this whole other um lens in this book. And it so there's Drew put a question in the chat which kind of ties me in with another question. So Drew's question is, he hasn't read the books in order, does he need to read them in order? And I kind of want to connect that to a question that I have about like temporality. And because this book is, you, like you said, it's all over the time spectrum and not in a linear way, which takes in Sue's, I think this is all merging into one question. Sue's asking about the order of the scenes. And so, but, I love it from sort of this like this sort of philosophical, what is time and how do we make sense of order and timing in our lives and make meaning through time. And so with all of that, because there's, scenes in this book that cross the crossings time-wise, right? I mean,
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, there's a scene in Smoke and Glass that actually is before the
yeah.
crossing. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about like timing, if for a reader who's approaching your work for the first time, and just the timing of the, how you play with time, and then, how to approach this book and how to approach your work in general, because these are, I mean, it's like immersing into a world.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great questions. So first, I wrote The Crossing. I shopped it a little bit and didn't get any traction. And I finished I Too Have Suffered in the Garden pretty quickly. Took a lot less time to write than The Crossing, and decided to publish that. And so that came out, and then I went back to The Crossing and did some editing and then published The Crossing. So part of the reason why I Too Have Suffered in the Garden came out for your reading pleasure first was it just happened to be circumstance. I think if you're totally brand new to the fictional world, I think I would start with The Crossing, just because Joel is, he's kind of my first love. And I think there's maybe just, for me, I'm organized. And so to me, I see that linear progression. I like seeing Joel's evolution. James has a small part in I Too Have Suffered in the Garden. In The Crossing, we meet Adam, who is the narrator of I Too Have Suffered in the Garden. I would say if you've already read I Too Have Suffered in the Garden, but have not yet read The Crossing, I would not come to Smoke and Glass until you have read The Crossing. Because that really shows you, it's not that you can't just read Smoke and Glass on its own. I mean, I did try to make a concerted effort to make each of these novels books that would stand on their own. And at the same time, this world is so much richer if you have an understanding of the relationships of these men prior to Smoke and Glass. As far as the narrative not being linear, that was not my intention. I didn't, I think that's the thing. Like, I know, right, there are certainly writers, they have like the idea for their book. I know this is something Susan and I talk about all the time. Susan Mikowski and I talk about all the time, because she's always very clear about, kind of where things are going. She has like, sometimes I know a lot of writers have an outline, or they have like post-it, and I don't write like that. Like, everything in my head is just sort of jumbled. And when I started writing this book, I was, because I don't even write in a linear way. So the first scene I write might end up at the end of the book. I might write a middle scene. It's just all like one big mess. And then towards the end, I go through and I put them in the right order. And of course, what was the right order with part one of Smoke and Glass if it's a nonlinear narrative? I mean, I didn't even know. I couldn't even imagine. And so I ended up writing the scenes or little clues to the scenes on Post-it notes, pink for Joel, blue for James. And then I spread them over my desk and then moved them around and tried them in different orders until it felt like there was like both not just a flow, but sort of like this crescendo. Like I really wanted that. And part of it too is, the reason why it's called Mosaic, that first part, is because it is a mosaic. It's all of these little scenes that mean something to Joel and James. And that's the way we are in our minds, right? Like, I mean, my mind, sure, like I have my nice, neat, linear schedule, like this is what I do on this day. But in my mind, it's all kind of messy. This memory from meeting you, Jen, is, all scrambled up with the memory of visiting my brother in Southampton, which is all, scrambled up with the workshop I taught last night. And so I wanted to sort of convey that that's the way it feels. Maybe that answers your question. Oh God, we've got more.
Oh yeah, and I'm looking at the chat. So Hopeton's asking about how did you develop the voices of James and Joel, and did you know when you said when you start you don't have a master plan? Did you know when you started this book that it was going to be a dual perspective?
I thought this book was going to be all three men.
Okay.
I thought it was going to be longer. And I got 2/3 of the way through the book and I realized that I had two separate books. And so I carved out Adam, I'm halfway through the fourth book, and that's Adam, I know, right? That's Adam's voice and James's voice in the next book. Yeah. As far as the evolution of their, like how I developed their voices, that's such a good question, Hopeton. So I think that what I sometimes feel like this is a cop-out answer, and yet at the same time, I don't know another way to articulate that these characters are they're just here. Like they are just here. They're in my head already. They already have a fully formed voice. When I sat down and wrote a short story in James's voice years ago, mixed media, and it had a lot of sort of shadows of Joel's voice because I'd been spending so much time writing in Joel's voice. But as soon as I started to write in James's voice, that was just James. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of it, honestly, for me as a writer is surrender. Like it's really about surrendering, letting my characters go where they want to go, even if I don't like it, letting them say things, even if it's not what I would imagine them saying. It's really kind of giving them free rein, which is both fascinating to me because sometimes I'll write a scene and then forget about it. I'll get busy and, then I move on to something else. And then I'll come back and look at that scene, months later, and I will have forgotten that I wrote it. And it's almost like I'm experiencing it as a reader would, because I'm reading it like for the first time. I'm like, I don't remember that word. Well, how did I use that? Why did I use it's cool. It's so cool. And I think that's really what I'm talking about is this notion of just letting go and letting them be who they are.
Have you ever been tempted to edit one of them? Like, after the fact, like you wrote something and you go back and you're like, yeah, I really don't want you to say that. Or like
James in this last book. Mm-hmm. I mean, both on that Christmas day and then, I just want James to be less afraid. I want him to be less afraid and yeah, but I can't. I don't have control over them. Like or I could force it and then it would be crappy writing, because really what needs to happen is that they just need to be who they are, whether I like that about them or not.
That's beautiful. It's almost like it's like parenting.
It is like parenting. I had not thought of that. It is. No, you're so right though. You're so right. It is like Yeah, wow. What an incredible analogy, because it's sort of like, okay, I'm here, I'm guiding, I'm guiding, I'm guiding, and then it's like they're gone. Like they're like it's about letting go. It's not easy. No.
Especially when you have the power of the keyboard to be able to just go and delete it in this case. I can imagine it's got to be, there are times when it might be like, but um, Drew's asking what role religion plays in your writing.
Oh, wow. True. We need to meet up for a drink so we can talk. Oh my God, that's such an incredible question. So I would say, so I was raised Catholic. I'm not practicing. I don't practice any religion, but I feel very connected spiritually to all kinds of things, to my work, to art, to source energy. Um, So I am sure, I read little parts of my novels and I think, oh, there's a little bit of that Catholicism poking up there. She was like, me too. um, Especially I would say with the demons, Joel talks a lot about sin, especially in the crossing. At one point when he meets up with Adam, he's like, what am I doing? I've like committed way too many. I think the line is, I've committed far too many transgressions to be wallowing here in the Garden of Eden, or something like that, And so there's no question that that's sort of, I don't even know, I hesitate, almost hesitate to call it religion, but that's sort of like dogmatic need to be sinless, or recognizing yourself as not being perfect and wanting to be, probably permeates not just my fiction, but my life in general, I would say. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of your characters' religious backgrounds or their religious practices? Is that something that
I mean, I have thought about that. I would not say that any of them, I've thought, is this something that would maybe be like Catholic or something? And I would not say that's the case. I would say that they've all been, I grew up around like a lot of Presbyterian kids, and like, people, like, they went to church sometimes. It wasn't like this overwhelming influence in their lives. And I would say that for these men, that's probably the way it was. And then once they got older, they were not necessarily, um, practicing anything. Though Joel, of course, I think becomes more and more spiritually inclined as the books progress, and very into sort of like the mystical world, and he sees a shaman and likes crystals, and much like myself. So yeah.
okay, so there's a long question from Katie, or a comment, and so I'm going to read that. I'm hearing you talk about your characters who are clearly so well developed and have their own agenda. How much do you think your own lived experience influences your writing, and where are there pieces of you?
Everywhere. Everywhere. And I would say probably most specifically with Joel, because he's an artist. I remember, I'm not sure she's here tonight. I don't think she could be here tonight, but one of my oldest friends, Lisa, I remember her saying one time after she read The Crossing, she said, "This is you." And I was like, holy crap. Because, Joel is, he's a lot of things. Kind of manipulative and dramatic and kind of self-involved. And but I think that there are pieces of me for sure in Joel. Much less so Adam, and much less so James. I mean, maybe there's like James is sort of, when I first started writing James, I was like, this is the guy I want. Like, this is like, because I thought I liked his physical appearance, and I thought, like, he's kind of this Texas guy. I can see my mom in the sidebar over here. That's too funny. Yeah, I can see her smiling. But he's like this Texas guy. I like Texas guys, and you know, he's got the boots and but like the academic background. But at the same time, you know, then I started to get to know him better, and I was like, oh yeah, no, not so much. I think more than anything, it's the themes that I really kind of work with, like this theme of time and betrayal and fear, both when it comes to art and when it comes to just living your life and risk. I think those themes, I think I experience them obviously in different ways in my life, but I think I like to play with those. I mean, obviously, you know, I teach these writing workshops for girls, and we talk about the fact that, you know, our writing so much is we're processing through our writing. And you know, I remember, I can't remember who told me this. I think it was McGinn who's on this call. I watched a few seasons of Girls. She insisted that I do that, and I didn't actually finish. But there was this one moment where the main character is a writer in New York, and she is dating this new guy, and she's written something like 40 pages of some essay or something, and the guy hasn't read her work. And she keeps encouraging him, like, hey, have you gotten around to reading it yet? And he's like, no, I haven't read it. And she says something to her friend about that. And her friend says, girl, if he's not reading your work, he's not reading you. Mm. And, you know, if you want to know me, you got to read my work. I mean, you have a superficial understanding of me if you haven't read my work, truly, because it is what I think about all the time. It really, really cuts down on the number of men I can date. Like, really does. So, yeah.